G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David. I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, where we specialise in helping ambitious but sometimes frustrated property investors scale up their property portfolios. And these episodes have really less to do with my business, but more to do with a lot of the clients that come to us with thoughts, questions, and sometimes frustrations about that ability to scale up their portfolio. Quite often one of the big sticking points is running out of borrowing capacity, which may be a cash flow issue, or running out of equity, which then we need to look at creative ways to either manufacture equity or look at getting more profit out of the sale of a property as well. This is why we've asked a special guest to come on this episode. And when you hear me call our guests out, I call them best in breed. So people that are really top of their game in all things property. And today's guest definitely meets that criteria and more, and a really friendly guy on top of that. Richie Ragel from Milk Chocolate. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, mate. Thanks for having me.
No, mate, really happy to have you here. And we were just saying before, normally we'd love to have you in here. I know you're just across town in Sydney, but diary conflicts get in the way. But mate, I'm really happy that we've been able to get you on here because I've mentioned to you before, we've watched your business flourish. I've seen you guys grow. I mean, we're talking about AFR fast starters, for example, but accolades aside, what I've been able to see your business do from afar, I feel like you've got a real sweet spot, and I really want to touch on that when you and I go a little bit deeper as well. But maybe before we kick off, I'd love to hear about the Richie Ragel story, for example, because I know that while you're a Shire boy, where we probably cross over is our love for cricket. From what I understand, that you've travelled and played semi-professional cricket, which means you live my dream. I'm a park cricketer. I'll put my hand up and say I specialise in sledging, which I think you've probably got more runs on the board than me in many ways. But I'd love to hear about your story and your journey to get to this point as well, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, thank you for having me here. So from a personal point of view, as you touched on, I did grow up in the Sutherland Shire of Sydney, so please don't hold that against me.
God's country, isn't it?
Yeah, God's country, they call it. I was one of the lucky ones, so I wouldn't say lucky. It's a great place to grow up.
Yeah.
And I did get out of there, but a lot of my friends are still in the Shire, which is good.
Yeah.
But from a very young age, I was an active kid and a keen sportsman. So not only did I play cricket, but played rugby league, AFL, for instance, as well. So
mate, just with a ball in your hand all around.
Exactly. Just sort of testing it all out to see where I'd land.
Yeah.
And I did eventually land with a love of cricket. So I was playing that from the age of 6 all the way through to adulthood.
Yeah.
And that love took me to London, where I played semi-professionally, as you just touched on, and was lucky enough then to travel around Europe at a young age. So it was my first foray of living out of home. So I was only 18 when I moved to London to play cricket.
Unreal.
And was there for a couple of years. So had an amazing time, a great experience, and sort of really a great way to mature quite quickly by moving out of home and living overseas abroad. So after that point in time, professionally, I returned to Sydney and started my career in the advertising industry, which was a career anchored in project management and operations, progressing through to the ranks of head of operations at one of Australia's fastest growing independent agencies. And then from a property journey, purchased my first home when I was 25 and quickly discovered my love of real estate and construction. So whilst I was working in advertising, as a bit of a side hustle with my now business partner, Michael, we were flipping houses in and around Sydney for 10 years before turning that side hustle into a reality and founding Milk Chocolate in 2017. So at Milk Chocolate, I oversee our data purchasing, construction and product verticals. So that's a bit of a backstory to myself and how I got to Milk Chocolate.
Unreal. And I love the name. It probably says that you don't take yourselves too seriously. What you do is serious, but don't take yourselves too seriously. Take us through the reasoning behind the name as well.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Michael and I are very laissez, very down-to-earth blokes. And I suppose coming from an advertising and marketing background, you're brought up and you understand how to advertise and market to different demographics and different segments. And the beauty of Milk Chocolate is it's founded by two two people who didn't have a career anchored in real estate, but we had a career anchored in project management, advertising, marketing. So we knew that to break into this particular market, we needed to be different. We needed to talk differently and have a different approach to the way that we're doing real estate and construction. So Milk Chocolate is very, very random, but like is Apple and Google. And so it's just a name purely that we created that is a thought conversation starter. So when we're going to networking events, people will normally look at your name badge and go, Milk Chocolate, what's that all about? So it's also quite memorable as well. So once you break into different markets, we started the business in the expat market. It is a name that's synonymous in that particular marketplace because it's easy to remember, and ideally, obviously, our services are really, really good. So that was the reason behind it, just to stand out from the crowd, essentially.
Love the cheeky brand, mate. Well done. So talking about your success, and look, we deal with investors that start at a very young age, and I love when I hear 20-something-year-olds get into the property market. And so take me through buying that first property at 25. What I'd really love to go and get is a feel for how you got into the market, because you got to understand your income isn't the greatest when you're 25.
No.
Your deposit probably isn't the greatest either, but how did you get into it? How did you then move to a strategy of flipping? Did you fall into this by mistake? Did you have a mentor or someone that could guide you? Take me through that journey.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. My dad was an avid investor, so he was investing in properties, shares, managed funds, for instance. So ever since I left high school, I always loved a spreadsheet. I'd always liked to model out my career and also retirement plans. So I had modeled different spreadsheets, and I'd be using different asset classes and modeling different permutations in terms of how I could get to 40, 50 and retire. And that normally included property, shares, managed funds, for instance. So I did have an appetite for property. I was wanting to move out of home when I came back from London, and back when I did purchase that particular property, you did have the ability to purchase your first home with a 10% deposit. And also there was the first homeowners grant, which was a no stamp duty as well. So the ability to enter the market when I purchased my first property was a lot easier back then. And also the median price was a lot less than what it is at the moment. So the barriers to entry was less. But I recognized that at that point in time and realized that it was a good time to be purchasing property. And I didn't want to be renting and paying someone else's mortgage. I thought it would be better to buy my own property and live in that particular property. So knowing what I know now and knowing what I did back then, I would have done things a little bit differently. I did purchase a small one-bedroom townhouse. It was in a suburb called Annandale in Sydney, which is a nice suburb. But in terms of the asset type, knowing that we would now be looking to be purchasing established homes on land where you've got the ability to add value in the future, if I had taken that approach back then, the options that I would have now on that particular asset will be far greater than what I do have. So that's the biggest learning from that particular purchase. But I suppose you are young and naive, and the access to information when I first purchased that particular property was a lot less than what it is now. So, but what it did show me is that first purchase in your portfolio is so important to get right.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's what I call that cornerstone property, and you don't want to put too much pressure on first-time buyers, first-time investors, for example, but you get the first one right, it's going to quickly springboard confidence, equity, cash flow to then buy the second one. But if you don't buy that first one well, you're really hamstrung to be able to kind of grow and scale pretty quickly as well. And you definitely talk about hindsight. Every investor that we speak to, there are elements of, I would have done things differently in hindsight. But one thing that they've all done is they've at least taken some action and then corrected that action as they moved on in their journey as well, rather than continuing to make mistakes as well.
Exactly. And it's learning from those mistakes, which is key.
Yeah, spot on. So take me through the decision to renovate. You mentioned we're going to flipping, for example. Was that driven by a particular strategy? Was it someone that was in your corner? How did that become the modus operandi, for example?
It's just purely brought out of passion and love of real estate and construction, and the ability to, I suppose by nature, I'm quite a creative person. And so I love looking at opportunities and how you can make a difference to a particular asset. So Love looking at floor plans, love looking at property. Even when I wasn't buying property or flipping properties, just still going to open homes and just walking through other people's homes to see what they had done. Bit of a sticky beat, which is good and bad, but it's how you learn basically. And again, when I was first starting out, there wasn't access to Instagram and Pinterest, for instance. So you actually had to go and view properties to get a really good feel for, what people are doing smartly, what's functionally a good renovation versus a not a functionally good renovation, and all those sorts of things. So it was really just brought out of just being intuitive about real estate and construction, and going to open homes in as many as possible. And I suppose by nature being a bit of a creative beast and looking to opportunities to add value, but then you're washing that with the fundamentals and the economics of buying something, spending X amount of dollars to create Y, was really interesting to me. And then the beauty of trying to do that for as little cost as possible to generate a strong ROI. So that's essentially how we got into that. And the more that we did it, we started to obviously understand the pitfalls, the pros and cons, and where you need to be spending money versus where you should be restricting the spend. They're all the key learnings that we took from that particular part of the journey.
So when you're starting out, you mentioned, look, I love spreadsheets. It's almost like got the best of both worlds, because you got some of the analytical mind, which is, hey, give me the spreadsheets, let me crunch the numbers, let me do the data due diligence, but then also the creative side, which is I can see how floor plan, I can see something that maybe the current owners can't see, of seeing this is how we can configure a property as well, because it's the art of the unseen sometimes when you're looking at renovating or flipping or adding value, right? So the mishmash of the two, and I guess where I go with that is some people have a skew towards one side, which they get caught up in the spreadsheets and they do their due diligence, and it's like it's got to come out with the green tick at the bottom, and then other people go, look, I can actually see what these people can't see, and if I can configure the room or add another bedroom or turn this into a large living area, it's going to add more value as well. So you almost got this really, I guess, a rounded skill set, isn't it? That it's almost an unfair advantage, really.
Yeah, it is. I suppose it's a bit of a rounded skill set, using economics and that creative ability to pair both of those together. But I suppose that's how we've built the business as well. So it's not Michael and I on the tools anymore. We have a team of subject matter experts to bring that together, and we're still essentially doing the same role and bringing together that same outcome. But we have now under the one roof, we have builders, we have interior designers, interiors architects, we have qualified buyers agents and real estate agents who've been doing it for 20 plus years, and we also have economists and property economists who are sort of bringing all of that skill set under the one roof, which is really, really important to be able to understand from an economical point of view the type of asset or strategy that we're going to be undertaking for a particular client based on their goals and their outcomes that they're trying to achieve. Then to go off and brief the buyer's agent to go and purchase that asset that's going to give us the ability to do so, and then hand that over to our interior designers and builders to go off and execute on that. So it is it's a nice process to see how that's transformed over the last 10 years from when Michael and I were doing it just as a two-man band, essentially, and then building the business to bring in those subject matter experts to bring that to life and be more efficient and effective. And obviously having people who have studied interiors architecture and people who have studied economics at university and people who've been in real estate for 20 plus years, and bringing them all together is the sweet spot that we're working in at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, to assemble a team for a DIY investor, that's a lot of legwork to try and pull that knowledge together, pull the team together, have them singing from the same hymn sheet effectively and going, hey, look, we can all work together and cohesively to get to the end outcome, right? That's a lot. That's herding cats is effectively what you guys have under one roof, which is nice. Because quite often we see people the builders at conflict or at ends with the architect and the interior designer. That there's not that level of harmony sometimes when people are embarking on some of these flipping projects. But I guess that's one competitive advantage that that milk chocolate may have as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that we really pride ourselves on. It's the team that we've assembled for that particular purpose, because irrespective of the assets that we're purchasing for our clients, we understand that if you're purchasing an asset that has options and the ability to add value, irrespective if you're going to take advantage of those, ultimately that's going to underpin the value of that particular asset in the long term. Because if you ever go to sell that asset, you're selling it with those options. So it's going to be desirable to the home handyman, the renovator, the builder, or the developer, for instance, depending on the options that are available on that particular asset. So it's really key to make sure that any purchase that is being made is purchased with that asset has the ability to add that value at some point in time, which is a key cornerstone to the milk chocolate strategy as well.
Yeah, great. I guess one of the centerpieces to the strategy is you take a property that has maybe good bones, a 3-bedder, and turn it into a 4-bedder, for example, and really kind of move it to that sweet spot, which is 4-bed, 2-bath. 2-car, for example.
Yeah.
So I want to go through a bit of a deep dive, like an example on this, and say, look, take me through who does this strategy suit? How do we then go through asset selection as well? And then we'll go through the implementation, the execution, how to actually make that happen. So take me through maybe an example that you've had, someone that you've worked in this situation with, Richie.
Yeah, for sure. So we, as I sort of touched on just before, we have multiple clients that come to us. So we have clients that will come to us who are looking just for a singular purchase, investment property, or a family home, or a client that's coming to us to build a portfolio. So purchasing multiple properties. So there's different outcomes and goals and requirements with regards to each of those particular scenarios. So for instance, a client might come to us and say, hey, I want to achieve a passive income within 10 years using property to facilitate that, or I want to build a portfolio that I can build and grow that I can hand over to my family and children when I pass away. So we build what's called a bespoke game plan for our particular clients, and that game plan basically takes into consideration your inputs, so how much money you have to start with, and also your outputs as well, what your ultimate goal is. And essentially we build out multiple scenarios for our particular clients to show them how you can use property and the strategies within property to achieve that certain goal. And in some instances, that may or may not include adding value to a particular property. So it might just include just a buy and hold strategy. And generally those scenarios that we provide come with different levels of risk appetite. So the first scenario might be a conservative scenario, which is buy, hold. Second scenario might be buy, renovate, hold. And the third scenario might be buy, develop, and sell or hold. Yeah. So it really does depend on the appetite of the particular client that we do have. And there's some good examples that I can take you through where we have worked with particular clients with different appetites and different desires and requirements. So one is a client that came to us. They're Australian expats and they're based in Singapore. And they basically wanted just to build a portfolio. So focusing more so on capital growth and equity generation over the long term. And they had no intention of selling the portfolio at any point in time, but they wanted to generate as much wealth within property so that they can hand that over to their children when they do move on. So this was an exciting plan that we built for this particular client, and we're purchased 3 of the 4 properties to date for this particular client. So it was focused on a buy, renovate, and hold strategy. So the first purchase was a purchase in Canberra, in a suburb called Curtin, which is on the south side of Canberra. And then the purchase price in this instance was $860,000. And the intention and purpose behind the purchase was to renovate this home and then hold it long term. So in Canberra, a typical home is a low-set brick home, which is typical of a Canberran home. But what we're focusing on in this particular market is homes that have the ability to add value and extend, but also future ability to subdivide as well in the future. Nice. So RZ1 and RZ2 zoning are the 2 traditional zones in Canberra. So ideally, if you're focusing on an RZ2 zoned purchase, you will have the ability to subdivide that home in the future. So in this particular instance, knowing what the strategy was before we made the purchase, we knew that we had to buy the property and that in 12 months' time that we were going to renovate that particular home. So what we like to do is allow a 6 to 12-month period after the purchase where we can renovate that home. So allowing us time to do the design, due diligence, council approvals, etc. in that period of time. Then once that lease has expired, then we're ready to basically pick up a hammer the first day after that lease has expired. So we purchased the home for $860,000. We leased it out for 12 months whilst we completed those development approvals and design process, and we undertook a renovation. So this particular home was a 3-bedroom, 1-bedroom home, and we converted that into a 4-bedroom, 2-bedroom home. So the cost of the renovation was $285,000. Now, that is a little bit cheaper than what you'll most likely pay now, given the cost of construction at the moment. So
So let's do the numbers. You bought it, what did you say? You bought it for 860?
859,000.
Yeah, plus your 260.
285 renovation, yeah.
Okay.
And it's actually now worth 1.6 mil. So there's a significant amount of organic capital growth built within that. So obviously the location and the identification of that location matched with the add value that we've created here.
Excellent.
Has culminated in a really strong return for that particular client. So the home is now renting for $775 per week. It's obviously continued to increase in value. But what we like to do in these particular instances, looking for homes that where you can, ideally you don't want to put all of if you've got a budget of $285,000, you want to make sure that it's working as hard as possible for you. And so you're focusing on the aesthetic improvements. So what is actually going to improve the value of that home to the general public. But if a valuer was to go value that home, or if someone was to come and purchase this home after the renovation, what are they going to see that's going to attribute value to that particular home? So you don't want to be spending all that money on structural works that you can't actually see. So you want to be making sure that the asset you buy, the structural integrity of that home is really, really strong.
Yeah.
So then a high proportion of your renovation funds goes towards the aesthetic improvement. So we maintained 3 of the bedrooms in its current condition. So basically just changed the carpet, the blinds, and painted in those particular areas. Where there was one lounge room, we converted that into a master with an ensuite walk-in robe.
Beautiful.
Pushed out, created a small 30 square metre extension, and created a really nice open floor plan, kitchen, living and dining zone to the rear. Fantastic. And put a deck to the rear. It was a north-facing rear. So obviously north-facing in Canberra is very much desirable, given it's a cooler climate. So making sure we're getting as much natural sunlight coming into the particular house can reduce your energy for one, but also just making sure it's as warm as possible in the living areas where you're spending the majority of your time. So it's a really, really nice renovation, and the client's obviously really, really happy with that particular renovation. The next purchase for that particular client was in Adelaide. And so this is a character home in Torrensville. And so now Torrensville is about 2 kilometres to the west of the Adelaide CBD. So when we purchased this home, we purchased it for $682,500. It was a 3-bedroom home sitting on about 750 square metres.
Nice.
Now, the reason why we identified this particular market for this client was because when you look at the surrounding suburbs within that proximity to the Adelaide CBD, in the inner south, inner north, and inner east, the median price at that point in time of those markets was about $1 million. So the median price of this particular zone in the inner west, which was a gentrifying market, was about $600,000. So there was naturally an affordability criteria that we looked at in this particular market. And also from our on-the-ground work that we did prior to investing into this market, we noticed there's a lot of gentrification within regards to the cafes, the restaurants, new bars that were popping up, which were targeted towards young professionals, and so attracting that particular market into this particular region. And now we've seen, obviously, really strong growth in that particular market, given that it's affordable, proximity to the CBD, light rails, there's a new hospital within walking distance, all those sorts of things. So the home we purchased, again, was a 3-bedroom home, and we spent $400K on this particular renovation. And basically the renovation was an older character home built in the early 1900s. So the way that they were built back then was that your living zones were to the front of the home and your kitchen and bedrooms were to the rear of the home. So very disjointed and dysfunctional. So there's a lean-to to the rear, which we demolished and extended out to the rear, and we reconfigured the internals. So ideally, when you're building a home, if it's a double-fronted home, you want your bedrooms to the front, then followed by your services, which is your bathrooms, laundries, for instance, and then to the rear is where your living is. So Australians functionally love to entertain and live to the rear of the property, and that ideally is connected to your gardens as well. So a really beautiful rear extension. What was really nice about this renovation was that we maintained the character of the original home to the front of the house. So kept the ornate cornices, the ceiling roses, the architrave skirtings were all kept and maintained.
Beautiful.
And we let the character of the home sing. And then to the rear was a really nice modern extension. So really nice high ceiling to match the high ceilings of the front of the home, but also keeping it nice and light and bright. It was north facing to the rear again, which is obviously letting as much light as possible.
Awesome.
But what the benefit of this home is, this particular home, and as I touched on previously, we talk about options and opportunities. This particular home has the ability to cosmetically improve just the existing footprint. It had the ability to structurally extend and add value, but it also had the ability to subdivide as well. So what we did do in the due diligence and design phase was that we manufactured a renovation from the extension point of view where we extended to the point where it would still allow us to subdivide that home in the future.
Nice.
So we knew what the setbacks would be if we were to subdivide where that new fence would go. So we made sure that our extension didn't exceed that, and there's enough green space in the front lot. So when we did subdivide, we just put up a fence. There's already a driveway down the side, which would allow the access to the rear block. So this particular client has basically got the home. It's now valued at 1.5 million, but now they also have the ability to plonk a new home to the rear. The existing house at the front is done and dusted.
Yeah, nice.
So it's very, very beneficial for that. And that's what we call what we typify as a typical milk chocolate home, which is a home that's it's character rich, but also it provides significant amount of options to execute at any point in time as well.
Unreal. Hey, man, thanks very much. One question I heard, and for both examples, is you've chosen the suburb based on its ability for, say, upside, like maybe up and coming suburbs.
Yeah.
The question that we get from a lot of clients is, do I buy that suburb, like the suburb, or do I potentially buy the up and coming suburb? So, I mean, for Sydney size, one of the most common examples would be we can't afford Bondi, maybe go to Coogee. Can't afford Coogee, maybe look at Maroubra, for example, as well.
Yeah.
But it's still not Bondi. Yeah, and so look, you're in Maroubra, and I've got nothing against it. You know, we lived out near Maroubra at one point in Little Bay, and the same could be said about Little Bay. But Little Bay hasn't accelerated at the same rate as, say, a Coogee or a Bondi. And you go, why would you choose an Ex-Suburb across as opposed to the suburb? Does that come up in your conversations, Richie?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And generally we work with our clients quite closely in this particular instance, because I suppose firstly it comes down to what your budget is. So if you actually can't afford Bondi, then you can't afford Bondi.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's one thing also, if you can afford Bondi, it's what can you actually afford in Bondi? What type of asset? So are you going to be better off buying a unit in Bondi, for instance, versus a freestanding home in Maroubra?
Yeah.
If it was me, I'll be buying a freestanding home in Maroubra, because we know that land appreciates and buildings depreciate. You're going to have the ability to add value in the future.
Yeah.
And naturally, as we know, that example I just gave in Adelaide is a prime example of people following the affordability path. So if they can't afford Bondi, they'll look to the next closest suburb. It's exactly like Marrickville, Earlwood, for instance, Bexley as well. So Newtown was
Newtown's the most popular example of this, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's where everyone wanted to be. It's close to the city. It's gentrified. There's plenty of cafes, pubs, restaurants. It's cool. It's hip. It's got all of that associated with that. But if you go to, you've got a budget of $1 million and you need 1.2, then you're like, oh shit, where do I need to go now? So they'll move to Marrickville and buy into Marrickville. Then you start to see that gentrification happen around that, because the shops, the bars, the cafes that are opening up in that particular marketplace are targeting those people who are moving into those areas, and generally going to be young professionals. And then moving into Earlwood, which is where I live at the moment. And I've seen it over the last 10 years, that gentrification, because people who can't afford Marrickville, exactly like myself and my wife, we couldn't afford Marrickville. We moved to Earlwood, and we're starting to see that gentrification happen in that particular market. So it's the focus is on the assets as well as the location fundamentals. And I suppose we take an analytics and fundamentals approach to identifying the purchase for anyone. So that's really, really key. We firstly look at the data, and then also look at the real estate fundamentals. So to give you, I suppose, an indication, milk chocolate uses about a 70% influence on the growth influences of the suburb, and 30% is placed on the asset selection. So from a location identification point of view, we will be looking at using our licensed data points. So we've got about 20 million data points that we use for every suburb, region and city in Australia, dating back to 1980. So our team, headed up by our economists and machine learning engineers, are modelling and interpreting that data and understanding what is going to be the next growth areas based on historical trends, and also using forecasting tools. And then also just creating our own scores as well, based on affluence, convenience, affordability, school, buyer demands, rental demand, etc. So we place 70% of the emphasis of picking the right location on the data and the drivers, but behind that particular data. And then we focus 30% on the real estate fundamentals. So from a location point of view, so what's the orientation of that home? Is it making sure it's a north-facing rear in most instances.
Yeah, okay.
Is it the high side of the street? Is it flat versus sloped? Main road, thoroughfare road versus quiet residential street? If it's an investment property, ideally want to be a 20-minute walk to public transport, cafes, bars, etc. The options, making sure it's, as I've touched on, ticking all of those options that provide that value for that home. The character. We have a preference to be purchasing established freestanding homes and homes that present with character. Older homes not only retain a lot of their original charm, but they're also generally built to a high quality and standard.
Nice.
They're more attractive to family home buyers. So we know family home buyers, they're emotional and they'll pay with their heart and they're not with their head.
Yeah.
So if you own an investment property that is desirable to the family home buyer, you know that there's going to be an emotional attachment to the value of that asset when you go to sell that home in the future.
Yeah.
And we take that approach, a broad brush approach to investment properties as well as family homes to make sure that that asset is still fundamentally as strong as possible for that particular purchase. And we know that character homes are bigger boned as well. So well apportioned, high ceilings, wider hallways. The bedrooms are generally bigger as well.
Correct, yeah.
And it can't be reproduced as well. So as character homes become the minority, the value increases given the difficulty to reproduce as well. So that's sort of how we approach it. 70% based on the location and 30% on the actual asset.
Yeah, thanks, man. I really appreciate a look into your the secret sauce. I'd call it the secret milk recipe right there. But I think one thing you've mentioned there is the sweet spot. And an experience share would be, we bought a 3-bedder. And so the 3-bedder for us was like, okay, it's a lesser price point than the 4-bedder, but we've always got the ability to turn it into a 4-bedder. And I feel like the sweet spot was for and you look at the median house price, that sweet spot's really 4-bedroom, 2-bath. 2-car, for example. And it sounds like that's what you do. You kind of reverse engineer the property. You go, well, we can take it under a median value, under market, 3-bedroom, add the value to make it a 4-bedroom. I now feel the evolution is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath plus a study. It just feels like that moves into like a normal premium price point as well, doesn't it? Like, again, the evolution, you would have known that maybe 5 years ago with work from home, but I feel like that's one thing that a lot of people are now valuing as well. Yeah. Oh,
absolutely. And we, as all of the renovations now that we're producing, we make sure that we include a study, which is attracting that work from home, that crowd. So that demographic who need a space to work from home 1, 2, 3 days a week, 5 days a week. It's really, really important. And ideally, it's not a study nook anymore. It's a
it's a proper type office.
Yeah, exactly. And also granny flats and studios, they can play a part in that as well. So the ability to convert that into a study as well. So that is a strategy that we use with some of our clients. So if they've got a strategy that's focused on rental yield, passive income for the future or now, granny flats are a great way to achieve that as well. So creating a dual income on the one asset. But again, that granny flat can be converted to an office space. So if you're going to sell that home at any point in time, a buyer might see additional value in that granny flat and say, I can actually, that can be my office moving forward as well. So it's a really, really good point, and that's the way that the world's moving.
Yeah. One of the questions I had for you is, when someone has this strategy to buy, add value, maybe get it revalued and then pull the equity out to then go again or buy, renovate, sell.
Yeah.
And they go, look, thanks very much, Richie. Buyer's agents, there may be a fee. There's a fee for all the extra work, for example. We'll do it ourselves versus maybe go through yourselves. And I'm not asking you to toot your own trumpet here.
Yeah.
But it's to say, what's the difference? The DIY, and I see this all the time, DIY, people want to do their loans, DIY, yep, go for it. Investors DIY, for example, versus done with you or done for you model.
Yeah.
How have you been able to kind of see a different rate of success or a different level of improvement with your clients compared to maybe those that do it themselves as well? And what mistakes have they made that potentially they can learn from?
Yeah, it's a good question. We because we get a lot of clients coming to us to purchase or continue the growth of their portfolio. More often than not, they have existing properties in their portfolio.
Yeah.
As part of the work that we do from a strategy point of view, Mark, who's our qualified investment property advisor, we will firstly go back and value those particular assets that they currently own.
Yeah.
We'll test and stress test how well that asset has performed over a period of time against what we would have been purchasing over that period of time versus how that asset's performed in that suburb, that location, that city. And then we provide them with a recommendation of whether or not they should hold or sell that particular asset or renovate as well. And more often than not, we find that the assets that clients had purchased prior to using a buyer's agent inferior to what we will be recommending, and the performance is the proof in the pudding as well. So they would either have an off-the-plan apartment, a house in a house and land released area, or an asset that was already fully renovated, but it was on a really small block of land. So the ceiling for growth is now restricted to organic cap growth of that location, as opposed to the ability to assist by manufacturing value as well to that particular home. So that instance, potentially we might not recommend to sell the home, but what they would have seen is, and what we show them in that throughout the process, is that if we'd just taken a bit of a broad brush approach and looked at the fundamentals from a location identification point of view, and also the real estate fundamentals point of view, if you had purchased a different type of asset, this is how it would have performed over that same period of time, looking at the data. So it sounds simple, but we see it so often where clients will come to us and say, oh, my accountant told me they purchased a property in this off-plan development, so they said I should buy one too. And or a friend told me I purchased a property in this particular area because the mate at the pub said it's a great area and they purchased it. But, history shows, and what the data shows, is more often than not, they're not performing as well. So as we touched on at the start of the podcast, that first purchase is so important to get right, because then it can hamstring what you can do in the future if you don't get it right. So I suppose it's the opportunity cost that investors may miss out on if they were to do it alone.
Yeah, no, well said. And it's exactly that we see. You and I are probably in a very fortunate position that we get to see a lot of investors' portfolios, the good, the bad, the ugly, the great, and what they've done. And yes, some people have been able to have time in the market. They bought 20 years ago, they've held and successfully been able to navigate rate rises, slumps, market changes, and they've just held it. Whereas other people have got in, they've sold it, and one of their regrets has actually been selling as well. If they'd held onto it, it would have done a lot of heavy lifting as well. So I guess it comes down to what's people's, you mentioned risk appetite, I call it sleep at night factor. What's that sleep at night factor? And this is a strategy that's not for everyone, right? Buy, renovate, add some value. It's not a strategy for everyone. When have you seen this strategy work very well? I mean, you mentioned expats, for example, that are buying good locations. They're probably on a good income, for example, and they've got that ability to then springboard and go again. But maybe someone that maybe doesn't have that level of income, what have you seen there, and how can they continue to grow and scale up their portfolio as well, Richie?
Yeah, so we get all types of clients. So we deal with a lot of locals as well. And, we purchased a property just recently for $450,000, and that was in Adelaide in a gentrifying market. And so we purchased investment properties up to $2 million. So it sort of depends on the client's ability to take on a renovation, or to finance a renovation, or even to hold an asset for a 6 to 12 month period without receiving any rents whilst that property is being renovated as well. But if a client, and we don't always generally recommend you renovate the property immediately as well. We, more often than not would say just buy and hold the asset. Yeah. And then in the game plan might suggest in 3 or 4 years' time, we'll execute on the renovation, because over that period of time we have modelled X amount of capital growth compounded over this amount of time is going to alleviate X amount of equity, which you can draw down on to then complete the renovation. Spot on. So that's exactly how we
find the cash or type another property. Yeah,
exactly. And so depending on what the client's initial cash deposit is, or their funding is, what that looks like, then we'll break down the different options. So sometimes clients have the ability to buy one property for $1 million, for instance, and don't renovate it, or buy a property for $700,000 and spend $250,000 on the renovation and $50,000 towards the purchasing costs, or buy 2 properties for $500,000 each with no renovations, but a renovation in 2025, for instance. So we'll show them how all those different options model out, and how they suit their requirements specifically. So sometimes there's a more of a stricter requirement on the holding costs, for instance. So how much is it going to cost me to hold if my rent doesn't cover the operating expenses of the portfolio? Versus some clients don't really have too much of a consideration around that. So it does vary. It's very much a bespoke approach that we take. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's key for us. But you don't always have to invest in renovations. a lot of our clients will just buy and hold for the long term. But we'll still make sure, as I touched on previously, that asset we buy for that client, as part of the buyer's agent's brief that our team are writing for our team, is that still make sure the home has options to renovate. So we don't know if that client situation is going to change in the future. And if it does change, at least they've got an asset where they can pull some different levers and add value to that particular home, irrespective if they didn't think they would when they started the strategy, but at least they have that option in the future.
Correct. And you've got that X factor. So it's not a normal homogenous three-bedder. It's something with an X factor that can then be on-sold.
Exactly. The zoning might be the X factor, or the ability to put a granny flat, whatever it might be. But yeah, it's making sure you've got that point of difference, which is really, really key.
Excellent, mate. I really appreciate your insights, your time, your knowledge, and your experience share with us, mate. It's been wonderful, and like I mentioned at the start, I'm feeling that we're going to get you back here in the studio in the flesh, and go through some more examples, more case studies as well, because I feel like that's what our clients have really gravitated towards, which is show me how others have done it. Yeah. That gives me the confidence that it can be done, and the couple of examples you gave there have been brilliant. So, mate, congratulations to you and your team on your success.
Thank you.
And definitely look forward to getting you back in the studio as well, Richie. Thanks very much.
No worries. Thank you, Aaron.
Excellent. If you want to reach out to Richie and his team at Milk Chocolate, we'll include the details for their website or their socials. So if you want to check them out, organise a chat. As we've mentioned before, any guests that we bring in here, there are no strings attached. For example, all we're trying to do is get their knowledge, get inside their head, work out what they're doing and how they're helping their investor clients as well as scale up and get those great results. So full transparency on any guests that we do bring in here. So thank you very much, Richie. Thanks for your time on this episode and checking us out. If you found that helpful, please leave us a review, or if you've got any questions, send us a note and let us know how we can help you out on your journey as well. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and take care until next time. We'll chat soon.